Democratic Party and the Republican Party decides how they want to do this. And that's why you'll see on the ballot the fact that Democrats are allowing you to select your delegates, whereas the Republican, who the people are exactly that will be representative at the conventions, whereas the Republicans select those people at their own private convention.
So explain that a little further, because this is where it gets very practical for people actually going to vote tomorrow. Democrats and Republicans will see different things when they look at their ballots, Ben?
Yes, they will. The Republican ballot is much more simple. You have 4 candidates, actually, because Ben Carson's name will still be on the ballot, even though he has dropped out of the race. And that's really it for the Republican presidential ballot tomorrow. On the Democratic side, you'll have Clinton and Sanders on one side of the ballot, and then you'll have delegate slates by congressional district on the other side of the ballot. And it will say who those potential delegates are pledged to support. You'll see either pledged to support Sanders or pledged to support Clinton. But voters will be able to choose, depending again on the congressional district, up to 5, up to 6, up to 7, and it'll say it on the ballot, but people should be aware that they shouldn't vote for more than the number that it says they're allowed to vote up to, but they can vote for fewer.
You probably should vote for fewer in actuality, because let's say you're a Hillary Clinton supporter and you have 7 delegates awarded in your congressional district. If you vote for 7, those just cancel each other out. But if you vote for just the 4 you like the most, then you can actually have a say in determining who the delegates are. Now, a lot of people might not really care, but some people might look at their ballot and decide they really like their state assembly member who's a delegate for Clinton, but not their state senator. And they could have a pretty big role in deciding who actually gets to go to Philadelphia to represent their candidate at the Democratic convention.
That's really interesting. We heard from one listener who was confused by her absentee ballot, so she got an advance view of this Democratic ballot because she said she was given the opportunity to vote for up to 6 delegates for her candidate, and there were only 5 listed on the ballot. I don't know if you've run into that before, where there was actually not enough delegates listed to give people the potential fullness of their vote. Have you heard of anything like that, Bill?
I'm not sure. I think there were a couple of places in the state where one or the other candidate didn't submit all the required delegates, so there was some problem with the paperwork, but that shouldn't be an issue. And it's unlikely that they will get all 6 delegates, because we've got this proportional voting system. A candidate's got to get over 90% to sweep the delegates, so they're going to get their full 5, presumably, if they happen to win 5 out of 6. And there's almost no chance at all that we're going to see anywhere in the state where a candidate's going to get every potential delegate. They basically need to win unanimous support in the Democratic primary for that to happen.
So it's much harder to win the full slate of delegates in a Democratic contest per congressional district than it is in the Republican.
Yes, but
because in the Republican, as you were describing before, if one candidate gets over 50% of the popular vote in a congressional district in the Republican primary, then all 3 of those delegates go to that same candidate.
Yes, the Democratic system is quite a bit more lowercase d democratic here in this instance, especially also considering that you have the names of the delegates actually on the ballot, as I was saying before.
So you have to get, what was the percentage to sweep the delegates? In other words, Bill, it's much more proportional on the Democratic side, all the way up to the chain. So if you get 85% of the vote in a congressional district in the Democratic primary tomorrow, you're going to get about 85% of the delegates, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and it depends on the specific district and how many delegates they have. But if you're in a district with 7 delegates, for example, one candidate needs to get at least 93% of the vote to sweep those.
Right.
So if they win 92-8, they're going to get 6 delegates, and their opponent's going to get 1.
So
and most districts have 6 delegates, and a candidate's got to get about 58% to get to more than split the delegates. If they win 57-43, they'll each get 3 delegates a pop.
That's interesting, because the polls are about that. Let's say Clinton wins the state 56-42. That's what one of the polls had the other day. Let's say the statewide vote comes out 56-42 for Clinton. Is it possible that they're going to split the delegates 50-50 in that scenario, Bill?
That would be difficult, partially because about a third of the districts have an odd number of delegates, either 5 or 7, so Clinton would get the advantage there. But it would probably wind up being a lot closer in the delegate split overall than it would in the percentage of the vote.
Sue in Queens, you're on WNYC. Hi, Sue. What's your question?
I guess it's a concern that we need to start thinking about opening the primaries. 27% of New York State voters, that's more than a quarter, cannot go out tomorrow and vote. So I think we need to start looking at voting for individuals instead of based on parties. I was out with some friends the other night, and there were 6 of us. We're all Bernie supporters, and only one could vote in that group. And I just keep hearing this. I got a text message from a friend yesterday. She didn't know this until, the other day, that she is actually affiliated with the Working Families Party. So a lot of people didn't know, 6 months ago that they were even going to be able to,
Right. This is such.
to change parties.
This
So I think
is
that
such.
should be more of a conversation.
Absolutely, this is such a big thing, and it's too late to have the conversation in a way that will change the rules for tomorrow. But going forward, then I wonder how much of a debate so many Sanders voters, potential Sanders voters, getting locked out tomorrow, and I think, as Sue suggests, many of them to their surprise. I think this is going to be one of the stories tomorrow on Election Day, that people who may be registered Working Families Party, as the example Sue gave, or just registered independents, going to the polls thinking they can vote for Bernie Sanders, but because they're not registered Democrats, they're not going to be able to vote in the primary at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the parties control these processes because it's their nominees and it's their, it's their primary elections. There's a conversation really getting going in New York about changing some of the rules around when you can register and then vote. But in terms of changing, opening it up wide to open primaries, I think is even further afield than what we're looking at in terms of reforms for the near future.
And this might apply on the Republican side too, because there are a fair number of people in New York State who are registered with the Conservative Party. And, the Conservative Party is to the Republican Party kind of as the Working Families Party is to the Democratic Party. And those Conservative Party registrants will not be able to vote for Trump or Kasich or Cruz tomorrow.
There's a whole lot of New York registered voters who can't vote tomorrow, that's for sure, in these 2 closed party primaries. I think the key thing for people, hopefully, this helps people realize that, going to vote is like a lot of other instances where you interact with the government, where you need to, take a little more of a proactive approach and looking at what do I need to be able to get this done in advance. At the same time, there's people saying, why can't you show up at the polls and do same-day registration, cast your vote? And for the people who do that, of course, the usual process for vetting their registration goes through, but why not do that like you have affidavit voting for people who will not be on the rolls tomorrow but think they can
And
vote.
a lot of states do have same-day registration, or at least open primaries, where any individual, no matter what party you're registered with, can vote in either primary. Bill, what makes a state decide to have an open primary or a closed party? Are you familiar with the politics of that? In whose interest do these decisions get made?
Well, I think a lot of it is the reason we have a closed primary here is because we have a long history of strong political parties in the state. If you're the Democrats who have had multiple powerful machines, you do want to be able to control them as much as possible. And having other voters being able to come in and influence your process, that's something you want to limit as much as you feasibly can. And the point the parties would make, to be fair, is that this is their process. As Ben mentioned, this is them picking their candidate, and outsiders shouldn't play a role according to them. You could see a potential for problems if you open it up. Let's say in 2012, for example, a couple of strong Democratic party clubs or labor unions might have decided to give Mitt Romney a headache and sent all of their Democratic voters to these small turnout Republican polls and given Ron Paul a bunch of votes to make the convention a much more difficult matter for him. That's the sort of argument they would make against it, but I do think every 4 years, like we're seeing now, people do get upset. but we haven't really seen any long-term movements to actually change this going forward.
And the rules in New York are if you want to change your party registration, you have to do it a year and a month before the general election. So it would have had to be last October. Somebody would have had to have that much foresight that there would be a Democratic or Republican primary coming up in April that they would want to cast a ballot in.
That might be the most egregious thing at play here. I mean, speaking with some people who, are involved in the voting process over the weekend, there's people who are really just fed up with that statistic that you just named, and the fact that New York has the furthest date from the vote that people would have to change their enrollment is really a disenfranchising technique.
There is some pushback, though, to this whole conversation on Twitter. Judith tweets, this whining about I can't vote in the primary by historically apathetic voters, annoying. Register and vote every year.
Well, what's interesting is that, that point aside, which is not necessarily a bad one, but people will make a political decision when they register with a party, and you should know the consequences of that. And people who register with the Working Families Party instead of the Democratic Party are making a political calculation, and they're making a decision to promote that party. At the same time, Bernie Sanders has made a political decision, never having fully identified as a Democrat, to run in the Democratic primary. He's explained why. So there's political decisions at play, and he, in New York, he has then left a lot of his supporters on the sidelines.
And a lot of people just don't know. I have an 18-year-old who's going to cast his first ever ballot tomorrow. And when he registered to vote, he said, I don't know, I don't think I'll register in the party. I just want to make up my own mind about things. And I said, well, you can do that, but if you do that, then you're not going to be able to vote in any primary ever in New York State. And so he chose Party.
Right, just look forward to the general election in that case.
They don't all have me as their parents when they turn 18, who are, almost pathologically steeped in this stuff. Ben and Carroll Gardens, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hey, how you doing, Brian?
Good.
I love this conversation. So I'm 36. I'm a relatively well-educated guy. I am a person that most people would think would know what to do tomorrow. Yet I wake up after having a very busy last 2 weeks today, and I realize, wow, in my head I'm all ready to vote. And wait a minute, I don't know how to vote tomorrow. And I feel like that's crazy. And maybe I am just a total exception, but if I don't know, there's probably a ton more people that don't know.
What don't you know about how to vote?
How to actually how to cast my vote for the nomination.
Right. Well, we've been describing about voting for the delegates on the Democratic side and just the candidates.
Exactly. So on a practical side, I'm like, that just strikes me as crazy, and there's a lot more people probably that don't know. And then on the more fundamental side, I just wondered what your guests had to say about just like the simplification. You've already talked about this a little bit in prior minutes, but just the simplification of this whole process. It's far too convoluted, and I hate to sound paranoid, but it just seems rigged to get as few people actively voicing their opinion as possible.
Ben, thank you very much. Bill, is it possible that for the Democrats, if I understood the description right, that people may actually accidentally omit voting for the delegates because you see the candidates' names on one side and then you see the delegates' names on the other side?
I don't know if omission will be as big of a problem as overvoting. If you see you can vote for up to 7 delegates and there are 7 delegates listed on there, the default for most people would be to vote for all 7.
Right.
But like I said, that will just cancel everybody's out and everybody's vote will go up by 1.
But if you just vote for...
benefit.
Right. But is there a scenario under which you wind up voting for your candidate but not for any delegates, and then those delegates get allocated automatically anyway and you don't really lose your vote?
Yeah, and the net result would be the same. And your vote would still be going toward delegates for Clinton if you decide to vote for Clinton. And that's probably what 90% of people actually care about, rather than who the specific delegates are going to be representing them in the convention.
And that's a really key issue when we talk about the names of the delegates that will be on the Democratic ballots but not on the Republican. Who the people are going to the Democratic National Convention are very likely not to matter. It's more of a prestige thing for party insiders and local activists. For the Republicans, it might actually be really important who those people are, but they're not on the ballot tomorrow. They're going to be chosen by the state party at a convention in May.